Okay, today I'm going to talk about personal finance and investing accounts with you just a little bit. I want to give you a very broad overview. And so I'm going to speak in general terms and I'm going to use round figures and I'm not going to go into painful detail. A couple of reasons for that. Number one, it's not necessary to try and lose you in all the painful figures. And number two, if you are to go out and open a plan, the particulars and specifics will be different according to which plan you might open, and things could very well change between the time that you watch this video and the time that you go to open a plan. So just know that I'm giving you very broad terminology, etc., and that always investigate further before you put any money into anything. All right. That being said, I want to preface this by just defining this for us because not everyone has a good grasp of this. I want to talk about the difference between your gross pay and your net pay, which all this means is when you go to your job at the end of the week, when you get paid, you'll get a paycheck. And if you make $1,000 a week, you were hired at $1,000 a week salary, then your paycheck will say $1,000. And then underneath it, they'll have all these subtractions that will total somewhere in the neighborhood of 25%. And those are deductions for the income taxes that you have to pay on the income that you earned. And then you get to keep what's left. We'll call that $750. So the gross pay is just whatever the whole amount is that you were hired for, the whole dollar amount that you earn. And then the net pay is just the amount that you actually take home in your pocket after taxes. So you could look at it as the gross pay is pre-tax and the net pay is post-tax. That's all that is. The only reason that we characterize those two things differently is for the purpose of knowing how much of it we're handing over to the government in taxes, and also so that we can categorize some purchases. Not everything is taxable. Some things you pay tax on, and then at the end of the year, you turn in your receipts and you get that money returned. Some things you don't pay tax on to begin with. Childcare would be an example. So you are given a blanket amount to deduct from your income taxes each year if you have children, because the idea is that you're allowed to pay for items for your children out of your gross pay and not your net pay. They give you a tax break on that sort of thing. So that's the idea. That's a quick thumbnail of gross pay versus net pay. So let's move on. Now, when I talk about investment accounts, I'm basically talking to you about retirement accounts. And so the first one that I'll mention, with which you are probably all familiar to some degree, is Social Security. Now, what is Social Security? Okay, in addition to a lot of other things, it is basically a mandatory social welfare program. It is run by the government, managed by the government, paid by the government, and funded by taxpayers. You automatically pay into this whenever you work for a paycheck. Part of the money that they take from your gross pay will go to a Social Security tax. And then the idea being that this is sort of like a retirement account. Every week they'll take out a small amount for the Social Security tax. And then when you turn somewhere between 62 and 70, around there, you can begin to draw money from the government who's held it in trust in your behalf for all of these years, if there's any left when you get there. That's the idea of Social Security. So the whole thing is funded by your paychecks. You don't have to put any effort into it. You don't have to think about it. It automatically is taken out. And then when you hit a certain age, if you're an American citizen, then you sign up for it and you can continue to draw until such time as you expire. That's the gist of it. Okay. Next up, I want to talk about what is similar to Social Security, but run by the company that you work for, and we don't see too many of them anymore. You'd have to have a really important job like a senator or almost anything working for the state or federal government. It's called a pension. Now, a pension, a couple different ways this can go, but the best pensions are paid for by the employer. So UPS is a great example. If you're an hourly employee at UPS, you drive a truck, then you work there for 35 years. And the entire time, you don't put a penny into savings. You take all your money, you spend it on whatever you want. You don't even think about it. It's just, you're blissfully unaware of retirement. And then at the end of 35 years, when you retire, you immediately draw $100 per month for every year of service until you die. So if I worked for 35 years, then I will draw $3,500 every month from the pension fund until I die, whether I live to be 72 or 108. Doesn't matter. So you can see where the pension is very expensive for a company. It's considered a huge fringe benefit. Most companies do not offer a pension anymore, or if they do offer a pension plan, Tarrant County College would be an example. We now all contribute to our pension plans, so they aren't provided for us. We're not senators or anything like that. So we pay for ours now. It's always been that way since I've worked here. I just know some folks who have been here long enough to have worked during a time when they either paid a lot less or they didn't pay anything at all. So must be nice. Anyhow, that's a little bit about a pension. So from there, the next thing I want to talk about is a 401k. Now, let me compare this to a pension, okay? A 401k is also held and managed by the company. And the difference is that you will contribute your money out of your paycheck to it. So every week you'll choose the amount. You can designate a small amount or a larger amount depending on how much you make and what you can afford. And the more that you choose to save, the more that will be in there during retirement. So that's the 401k in a nutshell. It's held by the employer. It's funded by the employee. And the amount in there when you retire is variable. It just depends on how much you've put into it. So the traditional IRA is the next one we'll talk about. The traditional IRA is similar to the 401k. The main difference is that it's held by a bank instead of the company that you work for. So let's say, for example, I work for Joe's Taco Shop. And it's a small restaurant chain, and they don't have a 401k program there. But I would like to save for my retirement, so I can go down to Chase Bank and tell them I would like to open up a traditional IRA. And IRA just stands for Individual Retirement Account. And so it's the same as a 401k. The only difference is the bank will hold it. I will put money into it out of my paycheck through the bank instead of it coming out of my paycheck directly through my employer. And that's basically the only fundamental difference. So the traditional IRA exists for people who don't have access to a 401k account. You don't work for a company that's big enough to offer that. So they are available to us through banks and other financial institutions as well. So you're free to walk into any bank tomorrow and open one up. What I would recommend, though, is that you consider the Roth IRA. Now, the Roth individual retirement account is quite a bit different from the traditional. And there's one fundamental difference that sounds like a small thing, but it ends up being a really big thing. And that is the way that it's taxed. So let me see if I can explain this to you as clearly as possible. The Roth IRA is different in the following sense. Both IRAs are purchased from a bank or financial institution. The difference is, remember in the beginning of this video when we talked about gross pay and net pay? Well, when I contribute money out of my paycheck into a 401k or into a traditional IRA, I'm allowed to deduct whatever amount I put in there for the year from my annual income. And then I only pay income taxes on the difference. So if I made $100,000 last year and I'm going to put $10,000 into my 401k or my traditional IRA. So That means that I put the $10,000 in, and at the end of the year when I pay my income taxes, the government says to me, okay, you can pay income taxes on just $90,000 because that $10,000 that you made will allow you to put that in your retirement account directly from the gross pay. It never has any taxes taken out of it. It goes right from your gross pay into the account. So that's a nice feature, right? It's there to help you out, to give you a little boost. In turn, when you retire in your 60s, hopefully, when you draw the money out of the account, whatever the whole number that it's grown into, let's say the amount has grown into $300,000. When you begin to draw that out for retirement, let's say you tell them, I want $1,000 a week from that. You'll receive the check every week, and you'll open it up and it'll say $1,000. And then it will have the taxes taken out just like a payroll check. And the amount left over will be approximately 75% or so. So you get a tax break on it now. You get to fund the 401k or the traditional IRA out of your gross pay and then pay the taxes on whatever you've accrued at retirement when you begin drawing checks. Or you could open a Roth IRA. And the fundamental difference is that in a Roth IRA, the money that you put into it over the course of a year, you are not allowed to take that out of your gross pay. That has to come out of your net pay. So in other words, you don't get any income tax break on it. I have a Roth IRA. And the money that I put into it, if I put $10,000 into it, the government doesn't say to me, hey, Tim, you put some money away, $10,000. So you can pay income taxes this year on that much less. I don't get that break that I would get in the traditional 401k or the traditional IRA. However, when I retire and I begin to draw those funds out, when I ask them for a check every week and I tell them I'd like to draw $1,000 a week out of this fund in my retirement, when I get the check in the mail and open it up, it's $1,000. And there's no section where they took any taxes out. That's because I've already paid all of the taxes on all of that money. And so that's the beauty of having a Roth IRA. Now, here's the real benefit, because you may be asking yourself, well, what's the difference whether I pay the taxes on it now, over time as I go to retirement, or when I hit retirement and start drawing the money out? Why would it matter in either direction? And the answer is, it doesn't matter that much. That would be a small difference. You may find yourself in a smaller tax bracket when you're retired, and so there would be a difference in that way. But here's the real difference. The real difference is that the growth in the Roth IRA is also not taxed. And that's the freebie that the government lets you get away with. And believe me, you get away with very, very little. So I would highly recommend, if you're going to start an individual retirement account, start with the Roth IRA. Because if you're going to put, let's say, $10,000 a year into it, and you work, let's say, for 20 years, so you've put $200,000 into it. But the entire time, during that 20 years, as you've put money into it, all of the funds in which it's invested have grown and accrued interest, et cetera. And so now the $200,000 that you've put into it over 20 years has grown into $330,000 with all the interest over the 20 years and the compounding, et cetera. You don't have to pay taxes on that either. And that's the amazing part. That's the unbelievable part, is that the growth is also not taxed. So it sounds like a no-brainer. Like, why would you ever not do that? And here's the short answer to that. There are limits on it. So if I want to contribute funds into a 401k or a traditional IRA, I think I'm allowed to put up to, is it $15,000 a year or more? It could be more than that now, into those, which no one puts that much. That's a really hefty amount of money to be putting into a retirement account over the course of a year. So it's not likely anyone's going to hit that limit. The Roth IRA is different. The limits on it now are $6,000 a year. So I would put every penny of my savings, or do all of my savings into the Roth IRA if it were possible. And I suspect everyone else would too. And that's why they put the $6,000 annual limit on it. So you can do well on it and you can get the freebie in the growth, but you're always going to be limited into how much you're allowed to take for free, because the annual limit is $6,000 as opposed to $15,000 on the other two traditional retirement accounts. So I hope this has made sense to you. I think if you take notes, you may have to watch this, back it up or pause it a couple times. And hopefully I've not misspoken, because I'm trying to do as little editing as possible these days. So thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you soon.